Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and today we have the biggest leak yet for the Nintendo Switch successor. I mean, if you've been wanting more information for the Switch 2, you are in the right place. This is incredibly exciting stuff because it gives us an idea as to how powerful this thing is. And by the way, if all of this proves to be accurate, the Switch successor is actually more impressive than what I even expected. Now, the source of this information is rather interesting as well. With any leak, it's important to understand where information is coming from and how it was all gathered. That way we can kind of judge for ourselves on whether or not we should trust the source. And I think in this case, even though it's unique, there is a reason to believe that this could be an accurate representation for what the Switch 2 has to offer. Now, the reason for that is because basically Fami Boards has been tracking component shipments between NVIDIA and Nintendo, and they discovered different parts that are manufactured for the Switch successor. It's quite fascinating how all this came out. You can go to their website and be a part of that conversation if you want, but we'll dive into those specific components today and what the Switch 2 is being compared to in terms of its power levels. Again, I think this is very, very impressive stuff. Before we get started, though, hit that subscribe button if you like this type of content. I expect we will have plenty more Switch 2 news to talk about here in the coming months, and plus, the summer showcases are almost here as well. There's going to be plenty of exciting game news to talk about sometime here soon, so do make sure to be a part of that excitement by subscribing. With that said, though, let's just go and have some fun and get right into the video, starting off with a brand new handheld from ROG. Of course, they released the ROG Ally last year. I have one myself, and I think it's a great device. Even though I prefer the Steam Deck OLED, the ROG Ally still serves a different purpose. It's compatible with more games because it is a Windows device, and if you have something like PC Game Pass, this really is the perfect companion for that subscription. However, on the downside, the ROG Ally does have some well-known issues. The SD card reader is one that I hear about frequently. Not everybody likes the analog sticks either, and its battery life is, quite frankly, pretty bad. Well, Asus just announced an upgraded model that looks to address those exact problems, plus even more. They're calling it the ROG Ally X, and that is something important to understand here. The ROG Ally X is not a successor. This is more in line with the Steam Deck OLED compared to the original. It's just an upgraded model with some extra bells and whistles. The new ROG Ally X, though, reportedly has the same chipset as last year's Z1 model and the same 7-inch display, which means the upgrade is not for OLED. I don't think that's really an issue, though, just because the ROG Ally has an excellent display. Definitely a prime example of what LCD technology can offer when done right. But the improvements that we're looking at includes more RAM and a significantly better battery. They said that we're not looking at 30 to 40% more capacity for the battery. We're looking at way more than that. Now, they also mentioned that it will have a longer SSD slot. That way consumers can purchase larger SSD upgrades if they want. So it definitely seems like they've learned a lot from last year. They're going to improve things like the analog stick. They're going to improve the SD card reader. It's going to be a little bit more powerful, and all of this really is just great signs for the future of PC gaming handhelds and Asus in this market. It will, however, come at a greater cost, though we've yet to hear the exact price either. Now, I assume they'll reveal that alongside its exact specs a little later on. Either way, it is expected to release later in 2024, and once we get more information, I got your back. Moving on, though, the last 2 days has actually been a sneaky good time for new, smaller releases. 4 different games released over the last 2 days, all of which are well received among critics. This includes Animal Well, which people are absolutely raving about this game. It's a unique Metroidvania that focuses on survival more than combat, and I've heard multiple people describe it as special. I mean, it currently has a 91 overall score on Metacritic, and users seem to agree as well. It has an overwhelmingly high score on Steam. So this might actually be in the running for the best independent game of the year. And I mean, if anything else, definitely do keep this one on your radar. Then also V Rising. Now, this game has been in early access for quite some time, but the 1.0 vampire survival action RPG is finally out, and much like fans, critics are loving this game as well. It has an 85 overall score on Metacritic. Now, currently this is only available on Steam, but a PlayStation 5 version is planned for later this year. Then next here, Crow Country just released, and out of the 4 games, this one is probably garnering the least amount of attention. So you know what? Let's go and change that today. This is actually a survival horror very reminiscent of old school games like the original Resident Evil. That's a good game to be compared to. Though in Crow Country, you'll instead explore a spooky theme park where you'll solve different puzzles. There will be backtracking and an overarching mystery that you'll uncover. Again, very Resident Evil-like, and I mean, we don't really get a lot of games like this very often. So I'm definitely interested in this. I'm glad to see something like this come out. And you know what? Even better here is that it currently has an 84 on Metacritic. Then for the last game, Little Kitty Big City just launched. In fact, this is a game that launched into Game Pass day 1, and if that's something you have, you definitely might want to pay attention. It does seem worth it. It has an 81 overall score on Metacritic, and the more I see of this game, the obvious comparison is probably Stray, just because you play as a cat in both games. But I think the gameplay actually looks a little bit more similar to something like Untitled Goose Game. It's got this almost goofy vibe to it, as you can kind of create mischief as a cat. But yeah, I mean, it's been a good couple days for these smaller releases, and I think right now that's kind of what we need after a very rough week with the closure of Tango Gameworks. Okay, so let's go talk about Nintendo and this big leak, though, because this is really exciting stuff. Here's the stuff that we've all been waiting for. With any kind of new console, some of the first questions are always going to be, what's the specs? How powerful is this thing going to be? How much of an upgrade is it compared to last generation? And how does it compare with the current competition? Well, we actually got a lot of those answers today through the FamiBoards leak, as I mentioned earlier in this video. These specs were discovered by tracking component shipments from NVIDIA. Now, unlike a lot of leaks, this is verifiable information because it's publicly accessible, and while I still recommend taking it with a grain of salt until it's 100% confirmed, that's really always the best approach with any type of leak, but this is still information that appears to be legitimate for the time being. So now that we understand the context of this leak, you can kind of use your own best judgment. Let's get into the exact details, though. So here are the summarized specs posted up online. I'll just go ahead and include a picture here. And truthfully, I don't really think this is going to mean all that much for most people. I'll post it anyways for those that do understand this stuff, but the 2 big discoveries is that it'll have 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM, and it'll have 256 gigabytes of internal UFS 3.1 storage. Now, if you don't know what that is, UFS storage is a flash storage that you typically see in flagship mobile devices. Now, solid-state drives typically might offer better performance, but UFS is still good on its own. It's meant to deliver SSD-like speeds, and this means that this is going to be a major upgrade compared to what we have right now with the current Switch. I mean, looking back at it, even though the PlayStation, might have oversold the idea of SSD technology early on in this generation, they were making some pretty wild claims there for a while, but truthfully, it really has been one of the most noticeable improvements compared to last generation. Going back to those slow load times is definitely noticeable on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So the fact that we have minimal load times now is pretty amazing when you compare it to those previous generations. So to see the Switch 2 get UFS storage, which is similar to SSD speeds, that is pretty fantastic to see. Now, 12 gigabytes of RAM, though, this one is quite interesting. Now, it's kind of hard to compare RAM to previous generations one-to-one just because there's differing speeds as well. But what you need to kind of understand here is that the original Switch has 4 gigabytes of slower RAM, while the Switch 2 will have triple that with faster RAM. So we're talking about a significant improvement compared to the aging Nintendo Switch. For that matter, the Switch 2 will also have more RAM than the Xbox Series S, which sits at 10 gigabytes. Now again, it's not always easy to compare the amount of RAM one-to-one just because there's more that goes into it than simply that. The Xbox Series S does appear to have faster RAM, but again, it also has less capacity. So, you know what? Let's just kind of ignore those numbers for a moment, and instead, let's kind of compare this Dragon Ball style. What's its power level? Is it over 9,000? I mean, who knows? But yes, the direct comparison that people are pointing to right now is that the Switch 2 will be right above the PlayStation 4 in terms of power, while in handheld mode, which I think is more than enough. I mean, if you go back and look at PlayStation 4 games such as Ghost of Tsushima or God of War as two such examples, those games still look incredible, and I'm really excited to see what Nintendo, Nintendo is a fantastic game developer. I cannot wait to see what they can do with that type of power for their first-party games. Games like Metroid, games like Zelda. I mean, these games could look absolutely incredible with PS4 levels of power. Now, in docked mode, though, it does kind of seem like they're going to give players more of a reason to play on their TV compared to what people do with the current Switch. Now, the comparison for docked mode seems to be somewhere between the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox Series S. And if that is accurate, then, this is extremely impressive for a hybrid device such as this. And something that you have to kind of keep in mind here is that the Switch 2 has the quote-unquote secret sauce. So far, we've really only discussed the raw specs. But that's kind of the thing about the next Nintendo console. This doesn't even include DLSS AI upscaling, which is a major advantage that Nintendo will have over the competition because their partnership with NVIDIA. Xbox and PlayStation does not use NVIDIA. They instead use AMD technology, which has inferior AI upscaling compared to what NVIDIA has to offer in DLSS. Now, Sony's working on their own AI upscaling method for the PlayStation 5 Pro, and we'll kind of see how all that plays out. But for Nintendo, DLSS will be a significant feature for the Switch successor that could potentially take their hardware to the next level. And that's one reason it's hard to judge just based on specs alone. AI upscaling technology is becoming a more important factor. But either way, I mean, based on the information that we currently have, the Switch 2 is a state-of-the-art hybrid console. Now, one last thing that I'll leave you all with here, though. Somebody created a render for the Switch 2 with its new 8-inch display. This is 1 inch larger than the current Switch, and you can see here, it is a sizable increase. This is actually the same size as the PlayStation Portal if you have that device, and I can tell you firsthand, that 1-inch increase, it really does make a big difference. And I think that kind of shows up here in this mock-up, which is why I'm showing you all. Either which way, though, I think the Nintendo Switch 2 is sounding pretty incredible so far, whether that be in handheld mode or in docked mode. Again, if this actually is close to the Xbox Series S while in docked mode, that is pretty impressive stuff. And, the fact that none of this is even accounting for DLSS and the type of improvements that can bring. Yeah, this is just a very exciting console on paper. I cannot wait to see this myself. Hopefully that will be sooner rather than later, but, we'll see how this year plays out. As always, stay subscribed because I'll keep you all updated with every bit of information that we uncover. But until next time, let me know what you all think in the comments below, and peace out.